on Friday by federal agents and charged with 7 felonies. None of the charges had anything to do with Russian collusion or election meddling, but you'd never know that from the penalties he faces. If convicted, Stone could die in prison. Nobody in Washington seems to find that punishment excessive. Many have cheered it. Officially, Stone was charged with lying, something most of our political elite engage in every day. But his real crime was flamboyance. Stone has spent the last 40 years giving the finger to the people in charge. In the end, they got him. They always do. Stone's arrest is already fading from the headlines, replaced by the latest political crisis of the moment or some new skirmish in the ongoing culture wars. Soon we'll forget it ever happened. But before we do, it is worth taking just a moment to consider a few basic questions about it, if only because nobody else is going to. First, why did the Justice Department stage what was, in effect, a military assault on Roger Stone's house? Stone himself asked that question on ABC over the weekend. Watch.
The idea that a 29-member SWAT team in full tactical gear with assault weapons would surround my house, that I would open the door looking down the barrel of assault weapons, that I would be frog-marched out front, barefooted, and handcuffed when they simply
But
could have
Roger, let me just
contacted me.
Let me
I
stop
think
you
people
there,
need to know about
but
that.
as you know, it's pretty standard for that to happen.
That's pretty standard, as you know. But is it pretty standard to send dozens of federal agents with rifles to arrest an unarmed 66-year-old man who's been charged with a nonviolent crime? Well, no, it is not standard. It is shocking, and any honest person who pays attention could tell you that. Roger Stone, who was there, says there were 29 agents on the scene, along with 17 vehicles, 2 of them armored, and a helicopter overhead. If that's an accurate accounting, it means the feds sent more armed men to Roger Stone's house in Fort Lauderdale than they did to Osama bin Laden's compound in Pakistan, just for some perspective on this. So what was the justification for doing that? Prosecutors knew perfectly well that Stone was not a flight risk. He's broke. He doesn't even have a valid passport. They could simply have called his lawyer and told him to surrender. That's the actual standard in cases like this. But they didn't do that. Instead, they went in with guns drawn. So who decided to do that? And how much did it cost taxpayers? Well, we spent the last 2 days trying to answer those questions. And it tells you a lot about contemporary America that we couldn't. We still have no idea. The Justice Department wouldn't answer us. The White House, which supposedly oversees the Justice Department, didn't even respond. Maybe they don't know the answer to those questions. Possible. They don't control Robert Mueller. Nobody controls Robert Mueller. Mueller can send armed men to your home to roust you from bed at gunpoint just because he feels like it, and there's nothing you or anyone else can do about it. Mueller has an unlimited budget and no timetable. He doesn't have to answer questions. He can do whatever he wants, whenever he wants, to whomever he wants. He cannot be fired. Mueller is the single most powerful person in America, and yet nobody voted for him. He is a living rebuke to the principles of our democratic system. At the same time, our leaders tell us that we need Robert Mueller, an all-powerful, unelected prosecutor accountable to no one, to protect us from threats to, brace yourself here, democracy. Nobody in Washington catches the irony in any of this. Mueller himself is a threat to our democracy, the most powerful man elected by nobody. Our media don't ask questions about any of this or even acknowledge that it is a question. They've chosen sides. Here's Roger Stone from our show on Friday night.
It's disconcerting that CNN was aware that I would be arrested before my lawyers were informed. So that's disturbing. If it was a dangerous situation, which would merit the SWAT team, well then CNN's cameraman would be in danger. I don't know why they would be allowed to be there.
So that's a fair question, no matter who asks it, and many began asking it within minutes of Stone's arrest on Friday morning. How did CNN know about a raid that was supposed to be secret? Did they learn from Mueller's team? Well, CNN reacted angrily to the question. We're reporters, they said. We're not state media. We didn't collude with the feds. We used reporters' intuition. Yesterday, CNN President Jeff Zucker dispatched his minions to bat down further questions on this topic. Watch.
On the right, on the fringes of the right, a conspiracy theory spread, and I won't get into it, but it was about CNN and Robert Mueller, and it spread
That we were tipped off by Mueller.
Sure.
Give me a break.
Right, to embarrass Roger Stone and to record his arrest, so I guess it would embarrass him. It's like they were saying it's propaganda. A lot of people, including some mainstream commentators and journalists, started asking questions about this conspiracy theory. And I think as journalists, we have to be very careful not to allow bad faith actors to hijack the conversation and to move the story away from what it really should be.
Save that tape. It's one for the ages because it summarizes everything. So just to recap what you just heard. We journalists, says CNN, need to fight back against the, quote, fringes of the right who just want to, quote, move the story away from what it should really be, end quote, which, it goes without saying, CNN decides. They decide what the story should really be, and if you don't agree, you're on the fringes of the right. In other words, shut up, you guys. Stop asking questions we don't feel like answering. But this show persisted because that's our job. And so we asked both CNN's official spokesman and the kid you saw playing media reporter on the screen a very simple question. Did Mueller's office help you with your story? The response, of course, feigned outrage. How dare you? You're right wing. Be quiet. But when we kept pressing them, an interesting thing happened. They didn't deny it. So to be totally clear, here's the specific question that we asked. Quote, did federal law enforcement officials confirm the raid on Roger Stone's house to CNN before it happened? Very simple question. And when we pressed it, CNN dropped the fake outrage. They just refused to answer. Because, of course, CNN talked to Mueller's people before the raid. There was never any doubt about that. All the barking aside, Mueller wanted the raid on Roger Stone's home caught on tape and publicly aired as a warning to other disobedient witnesses about what can happen to you if you step out of line. CNN was happy to oblige. So CNN acted as the public relations arm of the Mueller investigation, as they have before, and then they lied about it in the most self-righteous possible way and sent those kids out on TV to lie some more. So it answers a lot of questions. No wonder CNN seemed so eager to defend Friday's raid and to belittle and attack and marginalize anyone who asked honest questions about it. The network is no longer covering Robert Mueller. They're working with Robert Mueller, and you should know that as you watch it. Kim Strassel writes for the Wall Street Journal editorial page, and she joins us tonight. Kim, great to see you. So before we get into any of what we've just been talking about, there was news today from the administration that the Mueller investigation is reaching its final stage. Do you think that's true? And what does that mean exactly?
I hope so, Tucker, because 2 years of this is too long. We need some answers. It needs to happen soon. This could be the best thing that happened to the country in a very long time, if it is indeed finishing up.
Well, what a distraction from a lot of important things that are happening. So as someone who covers the criminal justice world for a living, give us some perspective. Late middle-aged guy, no history of violence, no passport, no firearms in the home, under investigation for over a year, emails and texts already in the possession of the prosecutor. Would you send dozens of armed men to arrest him? Is that normal?
No, of course not. Of course not, and of course it's not normal. And as you said, the standard operating procedure here would be to call his lawyer and ask him to surrender. And I think it gets to the other point of your opening as well, too. Mr. Mueller, unfortunately, does not answer to anyone. And as a result, we can bring up these topics. You can call and ask the question, why did you do it? He doesn't have to answer it, and he doesn't have to answer to anybody in the end. And that is one of the reasons that we should hope that all of this is ending, especially when you look at the list of people he's gone after and the crimes for which they've been gone after. Nearly all of them crimes that he claims that they have committed after he was appointed as special counsel. Not any for the time period he was actually asked to investigate, at least not of Americans.
So as a constitutional question, how in a democratic republic can you have someone who's accountable to no elected person, who's accountable to no voters, in other words? I thought all power in the government emanates from voters, but Mueller stands apart. How can this be constitutionally allowed?
Well, legal scholars have had a lot of problems with the special counsel law for a long time, partly on reasons that you just mentioned, and also on accountability questions as well, too. Now, look, in theory, he can be fired, okay? But what we both understand is that politically he can't be fired because of the brouhaha that would come up if anybody were to actually tell him to step down.
So why doesn't this, apart from what you think of Trump, or maybe you believe Trump is a secret agent working for Vladimir Putin, but even if you believe that, and you were a liberal, why wouldn't you be very worried about a prosecutor who was operating wholly outside the system and accountable to nobody? I mean, if you really cared about democracy, that would terrify you, wouldn't it?
Well, we've seen the left change their view on all kinds of things, Tucker. Remember, this is a party that at one point cared about abusive law enforcement tactics. They cared about the things you just mentioned, accountability, making sure that there was accountability in democracy and that someone had to answer to someone else. But when it comes to Donald Trump, they're quite happy to throw all of that on the other side. And it's been very frustrating to people like me who've been trying to write about Mr. Mueller's probe in an objective way and look at the evidence out there in an objective way and say, look, would anybody like to see what happened to Carter Page happen to anybody else on the basis of the opposition research that they used? The Democrats should be very worried that a future Justice Department might do this to one of their candidates, and no one should want that.
I will defend that candidate if it ever happens. I mean it. I think this is totally wrong. Kim Strassel, thank you very much for that perspective. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Michael Caputo was an advisor to the Trump campaign. He's had his own experiences with the Mueller investigation. He joins us tonight. Michael, thanks very much for coming on. I withheld judgment on Mueller, for over a year, wanted to think the best. Former head of the FBI. But watching what happened on Friday at Roger Stone's home has, I think, ripped the veil off. The guy's an authoritarian nutcase to do something like that. Were you surprised by it?
After we saw what went down with Paul Manafort and the story we heard detail by detail without any cameras present, I think it matches exactly what happened to Paul. And I think just like when it happened to Paul, people are going to complain and scream to the high heavens about how Soviet this tactic is, and it will do nothing. It will fall on deaf ears. And Robert Mueller, and by the way, the Department of Justice has verified that they can do this to anyone in America. I was surprised, I guess, for a minute, but the one thing I can't figure out is, the CNN camera is going to serve Roger Stone better than it does the Mueller team, because look what we were all able to witness.
No, that's a really good point. So are you convinced, as I am becoming, that Mueller did this for a reason, not just because he doesn't like Roger Stone? By the way, I should just note, I've texted a lot with Roger Stone, as many people in the media have, and Stone was always saying things like, I know Mueller's reading my texts, and being provocative. He clearly was reading his texts. But that this was designed to send a message to other people Mueller is investigating that if you step out of line will hurt you.
Right, and I'm a witness in this jackpot, but my attorney, who's former New York State Attorney General, former U.S. prosecutor, told me you can flip from a witness to a subject to a target in the blink of an eye with a group like this. So anybody who they have talked to, I think there's a couple, 3 dozen who they've interviewed. This was a message sent to us that at any time you can get a knock on your door and 29 men will come with automatic weapons, which, by the way, it's not only more than they sent to go after bin Laden, it's 29 more men than they sent to Benghazi to pick up and defend our own men.
I mean, I'm not defending Putin. I'm just pointing out the obvious. Putin's never done anything like that in this country, I have to say. We don't live in terror of Putin doing this here. So it tells you a lot.
But you know what? He does it all the time in Russia, and for all of us who have been concerned about Russia's involvement in our elections, we have to realize that we are now living in Russia. This is what Vladimir Putin does. I lived there for 7 years before Vladimir Putin took over. It was happening then too. And, that's where we are today.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to live in that country.
I'll tell you, Tucker, the one thing I'm really concerned about is Roger's funding. That's why I'm trying to help him raise money at RogerStone, GoFundMe.com.
Yep.
He's going to have to come up with $100,000 every 2 months until this thing's over, because he's fighting it to the end.
That's unbelievable. Michael Caputo, thank you very much.